Good morning, students. Today I am going to speak on a major religion in the world, that's Hinduism, and look at its three sects: Vaishnavism, Shaivism and Shakti religion. In this lecture, we are going to first look at Hinduism, its philosophy, and then focus on the philosophy and growth of these three major sects. Now, when we talk of Hinduism as we understand it today, it certainly cannot be viewed as a monolith tradition or a unitary practice. Historically, the religious beliefs and practices of the Hindus were too divergent to constitute a coherent monolith religious system that has been part of an imagined Hinduism in modern times. The very term Hindu, from which Hinduism is derived and which has been taken over by Western administrators, scholars and merchants, was the Persian variant of the Sanskrit Sindhu, the Indus River, a word applied already in the Avesta both to the river and the country through which the Indus flows. In the plural, it denoted the population living in that region, that's the Indus people. Now, Hinduism is one of the oldest religion of humanity. It is also referred to as Sanatan, that is eternal dharma, and all the religions like Buddhism, Jainism and Sikhism owe a lot to Hinduism. Tolerance and diversity, truth is one and there are many paths, is a very major belief of Hinduism. There are many deities, but a single impersonal ultimate reality. And the whole philosophy of Hinduism is that it is a way of life. It focuses both on this world and the world beyond. Now, Hinduism is a very unique religion because it has no founder, there is no hierarchical clergy, there is no direct divine revelation. It does not have any rigidly prescribed moral code, and it evolved from primitive animism to polytheism to monism. And what is very important about this is, in the course of its long journey, it has not rejected any of these belief systems. Hinduism does not discard the various deities of different faiths and cult, but regards them as a manifestation of one God. Now, the major belief systems of the Hindus are that it believes in one impersonal ultimate realities, that is Brahma, and it is manifested as various personal deities. It emphasizes on the true essence of life, that is Atma, the soul, and the Brahma is trapped in matter, the whole philosophy that art thou. It also believes in reincarnation because the Atma is continuously born into this world in this lifetime and after lifetime, and it is our samskar which play a major role in this. It also believes in karma, that is the spiritual impurity due to actions keep us bound. In this world, both our good deeds and our bad deeds have a lot of impact on our karma. And it also talks of moksha, that is the ultimate goal of life, to release the Atma and reunite with the divine and becoming one with Brahma. We can call it Nirvana or Moksha, and this is the major belief. Now, there are 4 yogas which are emphasized in seeking union with the divine. One is the Karma Yoga, and Karma Yoga is the path of action through selfless service. It talks in terms of, release of built up karma without building up new karma. It also emphasizes on Gyan Yoga, that is the path of knowledge, understanding the true reality of nature and the self, and also the Raj Yoga, the path of meditation, and Bhakti Yoga, which is the part of devotion. Now, to reach God, we need a guru, a spiritual teacher who helps us in obtaining Gyan and Raj Yoga. Now, the Hindus worship in different way. One can be through Bhakti Yoga, where you are seeking union with the divine through loving devotion of the manifest deities. One can worship at home in having a household shrine. One can also worship in the temple where you have the temple priest to officiate. And a very important aspect of this worship is puja, where you are making offerings to and decorating the deity of images. Another important aspect of the worship is darshan, that is, you see the deity, and it is, it can also be an ideal worship or not. And there is also the concept of prasad, that is taking the divine within your own being through eating food shared with the deity. Now, when Hinduism developed over a period of time, there were three major sects which developed. One was Vaishnavism, the members of which worship Vishnu; Shaivism, the followers of which worship Shiva; and Shaktas, or the worshippers of Shakti. And over a period of time, all these sects further subdivided into various other sects. We had Sri Vaishnavism, which became one of the subsects of Vaishnavism. It was founded by Nath Muni, and it developed and attained great height under Ramanuja. And then, like Shaivism, Vaishnavism was also based on perfect faith and devotion on bhakti. And Shaivism, in the course of its long history, further divided into Veer Shaivism. Now, the major gods of the Hindu pantheon are: one, Vishnu, who is regarded as the preserver of the god, and Vishnu is seen as incarnated in 10 avatars, or avatars are descendants, and these include Rama, who is featured in the Ramayana, and you have Krishna, who is featured in the Mahabharata. And here, you see Rama and Krishna are both shown with their consorts Sita and Radha. Now, the Shaivas worship Shiva, and Shiva is constructed as a god of destruction or a god who transforms. And he also appears at Nataraj, the lord of the dance of creation, and he is also worshipped as with his wife Parvati and his son Ganesh. Ganesh is a very important deity in Hinduism, who is seen as an elephant-headed god, and he is the one who removes all obstacles. All of us know that the moment we start anything, in Hinduism, we always start with the worship of Ganesh. And the goddess Shakti is divine, feminine principle. Durga is seen as the protectress, and she also has the form of Kali, or the destroyer of demon. Now, let's start by talking about Vaishnavism. Now, the antiquity of Vaishnavism is traced back to the Vedic period, but over a course of history, it witnessed various changes and a lot of development. In the Vedic period, we have nature worship in the form of sun, and Vishnu and Agni are among the several deities which are mentioned in the Rig Veda. From a mere solar deity in the Vedic literature, Vishnu emerges as the epico-Puranic period as a supreme power in a composite form of the man god, that is Vasudeva Krishna, the Vedic god Vishnu, and the cosmic god Narayan. All these developed. When we look at the history of Vaishnavism from 5th to 7th century, we find that as a religion, it became very popular among the masses, and it spread far and wide. It was accompanied by growth of devotional literature, iconography, institutionalization of the temple worship, and an elaboration of shastras relating to the worship of God. And in the course of this, it became necessary, and this necessitated the composition of the agamas. The agamas are contained principles of worship, how the deity has to be installed in the temples, it also talks about the various rules regarding the construction of temple. The period between 5th to 7th century witnessed the formation of two types of Vaishnava Agamas, that is the Vaikhana and the Pancharatras, of which the former is termed as Vedic and the Pancharatras as non-Vedic. The Bhagavata religion was more inclined towards the Pancharatra system. Now, if we look at the Pancharatra's school, we find that it is also referred to as Bhagavata, Satvata, Ekantika, and it occupies a very important place. The special contribution of the Pancharatra school is the theory of emanation, that is Vyuhavada, which, while bringing in the very world into existence from the supreme being, leaves the latter quite unaffected. The Vyuhavada doctrine comprises of the worship of 5 Vrihini heroes, that is Shankarshana, Vasudeva, Pradyumna, Aniruddha and Samba. All these Vyuhas were simple manifestation of a central deity, that is Vishnu, whose all-pervading power gave his followers protection from evil and demonic forces. To this were added the concept of Avatarvada, where Vishnu is worshipped in various forms and 10 forms were recognized as avatars. By the age of Guptas, Buddha also became identified with Narayana and he was worshipped as one of the 10 avatars. This is a perfect example of Hindu syncretism and absorption of rival religion. The imperial Guptas were devout Vaishnavas and they patronized the religion, and this is clearly pointed out by their inscriptions and coins. Now, this period was immediately followed by the period of the Alvars. Tradition gives us a list of 12 Alvars, including a woman. Most of these belong to the Pallava period and came from different parts of the Tamil country. Some of these were Brahmins and others came from different sections of society. Tirupanval was a saint of depressed caste. He belonged to Pana community of the Sudra caste. Namalvar was the greatest of the Alvars. He was a Velala, and Tirumangai Alvar was a Kala, and Kulashekara Alvar was a Kshatriya. Even those of the Alvars who were Brahmins, one of them was a repentant sinner and another, Tirumalsai, was a person of dubious parentage. So, all the Alvars did not belong to the Brahmin community. Now, the Alvars composed hymns in poetic Tamil and their songs were influenced by stories of gods in the epics and Puranas. They composed very beautiful and easy songs which could be sung by the masses. The works of the Alvars are collected and preserved in the name of Narlari Divya Prabandham, which consists altogether of 4,000 verses. Now, what were the teachings of the Alvars? The Alvars were ardent lovers of Lord Vishnu and they worshipped him in all his avatars. They emphasized on the universal nature of God. The essence of their teaching was that salvation was attainable by all, even the uninitiated. Namalvar or Santoppan in his Tiruvamoli is philosophical and lyrical, dispassionately speculative, and he fills the outpouring of an anguished heart. Now, they also talk of the idea of self-surrender or prapatti. The idea of prapatti and Sarnagati through the Guru also seems to have originated with Namalvar. And its importance lies in the fact that initially for the Alvars, bhakti or devotion was considered as a means of salvation. They aimed at the service of Vaikuntha by performing it in this world and in relationship to acharyas. Subsequently, this service was very simple in the beginning, but over a period of time, there were various methods which were prescribed and its practice became an organized system of worship with certain rigid methods that are impossible for the common man to follow. This was probably due to the growing Brahminical control over the movement and the temple organization, which had become very well established and institutionalized by this time. Since the lower sections could not perform these rituals, a guide in the form of a guru was needed who could help the followers in seeking salvation. Now, out of this developed the whole doctrine of self-surrender or prapatti, and this doctrine was developed fully in the age of Acharyas and became an essential aspect of Sri Vaishnava philosophy. Now, the Acharyas brought in a new epoch to the history of Sri Vaishnavism. The Acharya Parampara seems to have begun in the first half of the 9th century AD. Unlike the Alvars earlier, the Acharyas were very learned in Sanskrit as well as in Tamil, and they tried to interpret the essence of Vedas and Upanishads in terms of Tamil Prabandham. They combined the Gyan and Karma with Bhakti for realization of God. All the Acharyas were orthodox Brahmins who discharged their duties strictly. They encouraged the study of Vedas, performance of rituals and other temple festivals strictly according to Vaishnava Angamas, but at the same time they also introduced new study of the recitation of the Prabandhams, that is the hymns of the Alvars, in public and private worship. This principle is called the Ubhay Vedanta Siddhant, that is the dual complex nature of trying to reconcile. Now, Sri Ramanuja was a very important Acharya. He was born in 1017 AD at Sri Perambudur to Kesav Somayaji and Kantamati. His mother was the sister of the great Bhakta Thirumal Nambi, who was serving Lord Venkateshwara in Tirumalai, and Ramanuja had his early education under Yadav Prakash, a teacher of the Advaita school of thought. However, soon differences arose between Ramanuja and Yadav Prakash, and Ramanuja left him and went to his uncle Tirumalai Nambi, and it was here that the strong foundation of Hindu philosophy was laid. So till now, we have explained to you the growth of Vaishnavism, how it developed as a sect of Hinduism, and starting from the Vedic period where there was a development from nature worship to slowly getting formed, and how there were images which came up, and then followed by a period of Alvars who tried to simplify the whole religion by talking to a personal God, composing very easy hymns which could be sung in Tamil, and this was followed by the period of Acharyas who again made a very strong philosophical base, and they brought in Sanskrit into it, but at the same time also had the whole concept of prapatti or self-surrender which came into this. And now I am going to talk about Shaivism and look at how it developed over a course of time. Like Vaishnavism, Shaivism tradition also prevailed in India in some form or other. In fact, many of the excavations which we have had in the Indus Valley civilization point out to the worship of Shiva by Indus Valley, and we have found a large number of seals, and these are referred to as the seals of in which Shiva Pashupati, and many archaeologists believe that this is the earliest evidence that we have of Shiva being worshipped. In the Vedic period, Shiva is called as Rudra, and he is having the power to rule over heaven and earth. He is also regarded as Pashupati, the protector of cattle, and he is also seen as the invisible force behind all sorts of destruction, that is the catastrophes and other sorts of mishappenings. After this, in the epic period, that is the period of the Ramayana and Mahabharata, we find that Shiva becomes a theistic god. He is represented as a god of wide prevalence, and he becomes very popular. Now, you have the Nayanars who are worshipped in this period, and you have the Nayanars were also people who try to compose songs in very easy language. They spoke of Shiva as a personal deity. Now, after the development of the Nayanars, we again find that Shaivism develops into a branch which is known as Veer Shaivism under the leadership of Basavanna around 12th century. Basavanna was the Prime Minister of Bijala of the Kalichuri kingdom of Kalyani. Though he was born in a Brahmin family, he revolted against the inhuman and irrational ritual and the orthodox practices of Hinduism. He was born in a privileged class and enjoyed all the advantages and benefits of high society. Yet, he nevertheless cared deeply about the upliftment of underprivileged and unprivileged. He did not initiate the traditional, internalize the traditional Brahminical values of the family into which he was born, and he broke away from all these at the age of 16. He even removed his sacred thread. After this, caste did not matter, for he says, what if one masters the 4 Vedas? He is untouchable who is without a linga. So, having a linga was much more important than being born into a Brahmin or a particular caste. Following Basavanna, all the Veer Shaiva saints rebelled against the distinction of caste, and they believed that a devotee had no caste and all were equal. They asserted the idea that equality could only become a fact when the taboo of in respect to food and marriage and the whole unwanted practice of declining of the worth of an individual based on birth or occupation was done away with. Basavanna says, a pariah is a man who slays. A pariah if he eats the carrion. Where is the caste here? Where? Our Kundala, Sangarana and Sarana, who loves all the living, he is well born one. So, you know, he gave a totally new meaning to caste, and they did not renounce life by mistaking it as Maya, you know, which is generally seen in Hinduism. And they looked upon, you know, Maya was not something which was not in the worldly things, but it is in the eyes that see them and the mind that directs the eye. He says in one of his Vachana, they say gold is Maya, women and land are Maya, nor women nor land, the greed before the mind is Maya, mark it, O Gunashevara. So, you know, the total concept of Maya has been changed by Basavanna. They also rejected the Panchashuktas. You know, the Panchashuktas are the 5 taboos which are associated with Hinduism. They believe that a linga, when it is worn on the body, is a symbol of fire god, and it burns all external impurities from then on. Along with the removal of caste and death pollution, Veer Shaivas also removed the 3 pollutions that affect women, namely that of menstruation, during childbirth and widowhood. So, in that sense, you know, they were very different from Hinduism, which accepted these kinds of pollution. In no time, Veer Shaivism became very popular in Karnataka, and it spread to nearby region. The whole ideology of protesting against inequality, the differential power and narrowing of the excess of economic power that alienated the Brahmins from the non-Brahmins became very popular all over, especially in South India. They added immense popularity to their faith by preaching this whole concept of bhakti to the people. They said that it was not necessary to go to a temple to worship the Lord, and the God is present everywhere and each individual. You do not have to look outside to worship God. Basavanna says in one of his poems, you know, the rich may build temples for Shiva, but what can I, a poor man, build? My legs are pillars, the body the shrine, the head a cupola of gold, Lord of the meeting rivers, the standing shall fall, but the moving ever shall stay. So, you know, the whole concept of temple has been changed from something which is fixed at a particular place to the individual, you know, in the body, and therefore, you know, one can worship the individual. And he also talks in terms of, you know, the whole movement closed the shutters to the elaborate ceremonies and the excessive ritualism which had become a part of Hindu religion. See, when you are doing away with the temple, so naturally you don't need the priests who are required to officiate in the temples. It is the body which becomes the temple. And Basavanna is very sarcastic, you know, because by this time the Brahmins and the Hindus had made so many gods that it becomes very difficult to worship them. You know, in a very interesting poem, he speaks, you know, very sarcastically. He says, the pot is a god, the winnowing fan is a god, the stone in the street is a god, the comb is a god, the bowstring is a god, the bushes is a god, and the spout cup is a god. Gods, gods, there are so many gods, there is no place left for a foot. You know, so we had so many gods in Hinduism that it becomes very difficult to really, you know, even move about. So they did away with this whole concept of, you know, having too many gods, having too many rituals, and having a temple. You know, an individual herself or himself can worship God. And we find that by 12th century, Veershaivism began to gain currency in Karnataka as an alternative to Brahmanism. It had a large Shudra following. Machaya, a washerman, Shivangimaya, an untouchable, even refused to observe caste pollution. Madhavaya, a Brahmin, and Harlaya, a Harijan, decided to perform intercaste marriage between their children. But the orthodox lobby brought a great pressure, and succumbing to the pressure, Bijala ordered the blinding and execution of these two men who deemed to break caste taboos. You know, this event happened in 1167. There was such a strong hold of orthodoxy at that time. And we find that it led to grim reprisals, and you know, the three Veershaivite followers like Molla, Bommanna and Jagdeva, they murdered Bijala. It had a very violent end. Following this, thousands of Lingayats were butchered and the survivors scattered in different directions. The Veershaiva movement moved into different regions. So, you know, the whole Lingayat movement was born in a context of a divided and exploited society, and in order to challenge it in the name of equality, individual freedom and communitarian commitment. However, you know, the life of this movement was very short lived. In Karnataka, the support of the urban moneyed class particularly was very relevant to the Veershaivas, who rejected the public worship of images, and they were also, you know, discouraged by the large scale employment of professional religious priests. The absence of land grants to the Veershaiva monks, who also suggested their great dependence on moneyed elite. And we find that if you look at it, you know, even today in the 1980s, most of the Lingayats come from the three commercial districts of Karnataka, that is Dharwad, Bijapur and Belgaum, and they comprise of nearly 40 to 50% of the population. And they were the ones who really questioned the whole Brahmanical social order and the rigid caste distinction in society. But over a period of time, we find that the whole system developed, you know, all the which it had opposed. You know, it developed all the features of the same system which it had opposed earlier. And we find that the Veer Shaivism of Basveshwara was certainly not the same Veer Shaivism which followed the period after Basveshwara. It had lost most of its vitality, flexibility, vigor and revolutionary zeal. The classification of Veer Shaiva sects into Samanya, Vishesh and Nirbhara also showed that the whole sect had been divided on the basis of certain social precedents. And now we find that the whole Veer Shaiva movement moves into the Andhra region. And this happened at a time when the Veer Shaiva movement had declined in Karnataka. And in Andhra also we do not come across the term Veer Shaiva earlier. And we find that Mallikarjuna Pandita uses this term Veer Vrata and Veer Maheshwara, showing that some kind of sect did exist in Andhra. And popularly it is referred to as Andhra Shaivism. And we find that it was popularized here by the three Pandita who are known as Pandita Treya, that is Shripati Pandita, Mallikarjuna Pandita, Shivalanka Manchana Pandita. And none of these scholars received any kind of royal patronage, and therefore they were not able to command the kind of large following which Basveshwara had in Karnataka. Shripati Pandita was a well-known scholar and well versed in the Vedas, Upanishads and other sacred books of Hinduism. He was a great devotee of Lord Shiva and he lived in Vijayawada. He started Brahminizing Shaivism, and at the same time he tried to counteract the influence of the Mimamsakas and Advaitas by upholding the principle of bhakti. His line of thought culminated in Shrikantacharya, who wrote the Shrikanta Bhasya, openly declared that his system was Shiva Vishesh Dvait. And in Andhra Desha we still find that there is an Aradhya family which traces its lineage from Shripati Pandita. Shivalanka Manchana Pandita was another great devotee of Shiva who popularized this sect. He belonged to the Pandita family in which his father Shambhu Bhatta and his grandfather Shambhu Desika were highly educated and Pandits of highest order. He was a contemporary of Basveshwara. The third Pandit was Mallikarjuna Pandita, and he contributed a lot to the Aradhya sect. He was born in a Pandita family at Draksharamam. He accepted the Vedic standards and rituals and introduced these into the Aradhya sect. Hence, this sect was very different from the Lingayat and the Basava tradition, where there was no caste distinction and Vedic rituals. Many Brahmins joined this new reformed Veer Shaivism in Andhra, and the Vedic traditions gained a strong hold in the Veer Shaiva movement. Mallikarjuna Pandita states in his Shiva Tattva Saram, "O Lord Shivam, make it possible to release the people from this earth bound for salvations through offering and prayers in the path of the Vedas." So though they were revolting, they continued to follow the Vedic rituals, the Vedic scriptures, and they even modified the religion based on Vedas. It is said that Mallikarjuna sowed the seeds of Veer Shaivism and Palkuri Somnatha developed it to a great extent. Palkuri Somnatha was born in Palkuri in Warangal. Though he was a strong advocate of Veer Shaivism, he tried to follow a middle path. His reverence and affection towards Mallikarjuna Pandita made him write Pandita Radhya Charitra, and he criticized the worship of different gods by Brahmin by saying, it is proper and accepted to pray and worship. Is it proper to worship and pray lesser gods and goddesses while Sarveshwara is there? So, again he wanted to focus on the worship of one single god, that is Shiva. He also attempted to bring into his fold a large number of untouchables. And he says, it cannot be tolerated and justified to keep the Shudras aloof. What dharma and what morality and which Puran support this? Yet in spite of his zeal to bring about a social change, we find that the Veershaiva sect did not make much headway in Andhra. The influence of the sect was very limited, more in the Telangana region from the time of under the rule of Western Chalukyas to the later Rashtrakutas. It is in this region that we find various Veershaiva mutts which continue to exist till today. And there were a large number of Jain monasteries which were destroyed, and comparatively we find that the number of Jain temples destroyed are much more in the Telangana region than in the Andhra region. In spite of the Veershaivas' objection to temple and temple worship, a large number of Shaivite temples were built across the region by kings, feudatories, and a large number of individuals. And therefore, unlike Karnataka, in Andhra this movement had a very limited impact, because most probably Veershaivism had declined in Karnataka by this time. It was no longer a radical ideology with which it had started, and it had become very divided and exclusive, and this was the factors which continued into Andhra. And we find that by the time of 14th century, we come across the term Veershaivism in many inscriptions. By the time of Mallikarjuna Pandita and Somanatha, many Veershaiva Jangamas of Karnataka had started migrating to Andhra and from Karnataka and Tamil Nadu region and settled here. The followers of this faith were primarily confined to a certain section. They were of the Vyasa community. We had a large number of Padmasalis, that is the weavers, the Vishwakarma, and a few of the Panchama communities. And therefore, though the literature of the Veershaivas appears to be very revolutionary, the propagators of the faith were unable to put their ideas into practice. In fact, Mallikarjuna Pandita continued to wear his sacred thread throughout his life, and we find that most of the revolutionary zeal of this sect was confined to literature. And then this sect therefore took a very mild form in Andhra, and it is popularly referred to as the Veershaiva, the Aradhya sect in Andhra. However, it was one area where the Veershaiva movement had a lot of impact, and it was with respect to women. We had a large number of women who followed this sect. The Veershaiva movement had intended to bring about a change in society by questioning the whole Brahminical monopoly, and these included women also. Indian society, like a large number of society, was very patriarchal, and we find that many of these patriarchal values were expressed through specific cultural metaphors that regulated aspects of sexuality, reproduction, and social norms. There were elaborate rules prohibiting women from specific activities and denying them certain rights. And there were a more subtle expression of this was through symbolisms giving messages of inferiority of women. And we find that from 580 to 1200 AD, there was a lot of deterioration in women's status where they were regarded as Shudras. And we find that they were not allowed to go through the Upanayan, Sanskara, recite the Vedas, and the kind of, most of the time their education was stopped. And this was something, which the Veershaivan women totally did away with. And we find that women were given a lot of equality in the practice of religion. There were a large number of saints who entered this sect. And the Veerashaiva movement accepted these women saints without any regard of, that they were different from men. And they strongly believe that the spiritual path is something which is open to both men and women. In fact, many of the Veerashaiva saints refuse to recognize any distinction between men and women. Dasamayi says at a place, it's a very interesting vachana which she is saying. Suppose you cut a tall bamboo into two, make the bottom piece a woman and the head piece a man, rub them together till they kindle. Tell me now that the fire which is born, is it male or female? So in that sense, they were talking of oneness of being, which is very important. And Akka Mahadevi was a very important saint of this movement. And Akka Mahadevi played a major role in popularizing the Veerashaiva movement. According to legend, she was a contemporary of Basavanna, and she was the daughter of a rich merchant in a village at Udutal, and having born into the lap of luxury, she led a very comfortable life. She was a devotee of Shiva from an earlier period. She was initiated into its worship by an unknown guru. According to legend, she grew up into a very beautiful woman, and the chieftain of the land named Kaushika fell in love with her, and he tried to marry her and she kept refusing, and most probably he used a lot of coercion, and finally she was forced to marry Kaushika, but she kept a promise in front of him that he is not going to touch her against her wishes. But then when this happens 3 times, she leaves his house and she walks out of the house, and she, as a mark of protest, she even leaves behind her clothes and she starts walking out naked, wandering in quest of a spiritual power. She had to face a lot of rigorous examination by the bhaktas. Many questioned her spiritual credentials, and others felt that a woman should not be accepted into the group. Many were appalled by her nudity, because she rejected all the social modes and all that which it implied. Yet Mahadevi Akka had to answer a large number of questions related to her nudity and prove her loyalty and her religious devotion. Allama Prabhu, another saint of the order, felt that her nudity did not go far beyond, because she was still immersed in the world. He wanted to know why she had covered her private part with her long terraces. Today also, if you look at photographs of Akka Mahadevi, she is shown with having long terraces, and she is covering her private parts with it. And they question, saying that she was really not that faithful. But then Akka Mahadevi has an answer to these, and she says in one of her vachanas, having offered the body to the linga, the body becomes bodiless. Having offered the mind to knowledge, the mind becomes free. Having offered the passion of true joy, the passion becomes empty. Having destroyed the body, mind and will, the body becomes bodiless. Having foisted upon the linga all pleasures of an embodiment, I have become a devotee, a good wife to my Lord, the linga. I have touched and merged into my Lord, the Lord white as jasmine. So, she is not even afraid of moving out alone. And she has composed some beautiful vachanas illustrating her philosophy. She talks a lot about equality between men and women. She says, did the breath of the mistress have breasts and long hair? Or did the master breathe breath where sacred thread? Did the outcast last in the line hold with his outgoing breath the stick of his tribe? Why do fools of this world know of snares and you set, O Ramnatha? So, she is questioning this whole distinction. She also talks very boldly at one place. There is no distinction of man and women. She overcomes this distinction. She says, if they see breasts and long hair coming, they call it a man. But look at the self that hovers in between is neither a man nor a woman, O Ramnatha. Now, the kind of, she also talks about, the different kind of social background, and we have a large number of women who followed Akka Mahadevi. They came from different background, different classes, though the movement had people of royalty as well as the working class among their followers. And there was a widow called Akka Nagama, there was a co-wife like Nilochana, and who had denounced the whole institution of marriage. The Veer Shaivas argued that the wearer of the linga, even if it is a woman, is pure for the aspect of, wearing the linga, because fire burns all the impurities. The Veer Shaivas removed all the 5 pollutions of the Hindu Panchasukta, the 5 basic elements which segregate a woman in all socio-religious rites, that is during menstruation, during childbirth, and permanently after widowhood. And they said that many of the Veer Shaiva rituals can be performed by both men and women, by both girls and boys. The Linga Dharana rituals, or the bestowal of the consecrated linga by a guru to a newborn child, is done both for the girl as well as the female child as well as the male child. And the Diksha, or the rite, is considered to a means of spiritual birth, and it is open to both men and women. After initiation, a Veer Shaiva is expected to follow the 5 codes of conduct and the Pancha charas, that is the most important being the Linga Chara, that is the daily worship of the lingas. And we find that, this gives so much power to Akka Mahadevi that she is able to do away with all kinds of worldly rituals. She says that, she is married against her will to a powerful and a worldly man. But then, Mahadevi Akka tried her best to combine her dharma and her devotion to God. But then when her husband obstructs and he does not allow her to perform her dharma, she just walks out of the marriage. And she says that in one of her very telling vachanas, she says, take these husbands who die and decay and feed them to your kitchen fires. And remember, this is happening around the 12th century, when we are talking of a very conservative society. And she accepts Chinna Mallikarjuna as her great spouse. She looks upon him, she has a very adulterous relationship with her God. And she says in one of her vachana, as long as woman is a woman, then man defiles her. As long as a man is a man, a woman defiles him. When the mind taint is gone, is there, good sir, room for the body's taint? The entire world is mad because of this adventurous taint. Look at you, good sir, for the great spouse called Chinna Mallikarjuna, my lord, the whole world is a wife. So not only she, the whole world becomes a follower of Chinna Mallikarjuna. And we find that, she talks also in terms of her life in marriage. And she says in a very, she talks in a very outpouring familial paradigm. She says, I have Maya for mother-in-law, the world for father-in-law, 3 brother-in-laws like tigers, and the husband's thoughts are full of laughing women. No God this man, and I cannot cross this sister-in-law. but I will give this venture slip and cuckold Hara my lord. So, she, in Hinduism, the husband is seen as a god, but she is very open and critical of him, and she can see for what he is worth, and she finds all her devotion into this god who is her lord. And we have again, the same kind of thoughts are also echoed by Akka Nagamma, who says Guru himself as parents, Linga as husband, the Jangamas as in-laws, Shiva Bhaktas are so many relatives, truth and rigid conduct are welcome guests in one's house. So, they use the whole paradigm of family, and they are using it to explain their bhakti. And we find that again, there is a lot of questioning. Akka Mahadevi, when she is moving around naked, with so much guts all around in the forest, obviously there are lots of questions regarding this, and she has written a large number of vachana. She says at one place, this thing, those who discard, people are very critical of her. And we find that Gudave, who is the wife of Baleswara, she says at one place, what use is it if the body is without covering? It is the mind which should be without covering. At another saint, Akkama, she says, those who discard clothes are children of donkeys. Those who shave their heads are children of widows. Those who have matted locks are children of Holaya, that is the untouchable class. What is important is the knowledge and right conduct. So, many people are also opposing Akka Mahadevi and her whole idea of how she is discarding clothes. And yet, she very boldly, she just fixes her mind on one God. But slowly, the whole radicalization of the Veerashaiva sect did not really last long, even in Karnataka. And we find that this whole absence of economic equality and the inbuilt occupational and income differentiation between the poor Madigas and the Holayas on one hand, and the rich Okalingas, the merchant community on the other, it resulted over a period of time into the whole division of the Veerashaiva movement into different class hierarchies and social inequalities. We find, if you, R.N. Nandi has clearly shown that there were various divisions which emerged in the Veerashaiva movement, and we find that the trading communities together with the Jangamas were called the Panchamshalis, and they constituted the top rung of the Veerashaiva movement, and there was no intermarriage or interdining among the Panchamashalis and the other community. The rest of the communities were called non-Panchamshalis. The second, you had people like, Astivarna in this, who could neither interdine or marry with the Panchamas. You had people like the tanners, the washerwomen, and all untouchables who constituted the lowest rung. And these were Veerashaivites only in name, and they had no right to Linga Dharma. They could not even worship Linga, and they could not intermix with the Varna. And so, over a period of time, we find that the whole Veerashaiva movement became as exclusive. It became one very exclusive, and it forbid interdining, intermarrying, and we find that it soon developed, as R.N. Nandi has clearly shown in many of his writings, it developed a social exclusiveness based on privilege of birth and cleanliness of profession, much along the same lines like the Brahminical caste system, which the sect had originally decried and criticized. And again we find that slowly, the whole sect became very divided, and it lost its importance, and it was no longer the radical force with which it had started. Now I am going to talk about the third aspect, that is Shaktism. Now the expression Shaktism is derived from the word Shakti. The word Shakti means power, both latent and manifest. When personalized, it means the Devi of power, and she is the Deva. The Devi Shakti is the powerful aspect of the Supreme Spirit. The doctrine and ritual of Shaktism are contained in a special branch of Holy Scriptures of India called the Tantra Shastra, which acknowledges the authority of the Vedas. Now, if you look at some of the deities, we find that we have a lot of illustrations of the Shakti sculptures which are found all over, and we have a lot of depictions of Shakti which can be seen in various temples. Shakti both as a creator and Shakti again as a destroyer. We also have found a large number of Shakti icons, where she is depicted in various forms, as a benevolent mother or as a ruthless avenger who is trying to take revenge. Now the focal point of Shaktism is the power, that is Shakti, and the universe which has to be meditated upon, and the worshipper dedicates himself to the mother. Now the goddess Shakti is seen as the power which pervades the whole universe, from which the universe has emanated. And there is nothing within the manifested world which is not Shakti in its essence. The whole world emerges from this Shakti. The manifestation of the world is mind and matter. That is to say, all that we call our thought, will, imagination in the mind, all these are in the realm of matter. And therefore, this is what basically Shaktism is trying to depict, whether we have a lot of illustrations, of Shakti cult, even as a result of the impact of Buddhism, and she is shown as in Tantricism. Now Shaktism also talks of the unity of Shakta and Shakti. The followers of Shaktism, the worshippers of Shakti are called Shakta. And in this concept, the goddess is described as Shakta Tantra, and that is the holy scriptures of Shaktism, and in a very poetical way. Whereas we speak of Mother Nature only in a comparative manner, for the Shaktas, this is an absolute reality. Nature is her whole body. Her presence is personally felt by him when he is standing on fertile ground of the earth, and he touches her life and it blossoms in all different forms. He will find her light too within his mind and consciousness. Thus to the Shakta, the whole universe of mind and matter reveals itself in its unity. He sees before him her great body, which he adores, her sacred feet, her heart, her mind. Hence, in the ultimate terms, there is really not much difference between the Shakti and the Shakta. They appear to be different, but in reality they are only one. Now, the whole philosophy of Shaktism has this whole concept of, Shiv Shakti. That is, the whole universe of mind and matter is created by her, the powerful goddess Shakti. in
growth. And if we look into the history, then we will be able to see that how, these various sects developed out of Hinduism and had a long history over the course of the century. Thank you.